Okay, there's going to be spoilers for Ozark. This last season and really the last episode are such a disappointment. We're going to have to break down really what goes on in the show. The best thing about Ozark is the continual, relentless amount of conflict that continues to pour itself over the birds. And the real appeal is watching how Marty and Wendy are able to either act or talk their way out of it a lot of times. Now, I think this was perfect, especially in the first episode. The pilot episode of Ozark is fantastic. It worked very well when you had things like the death of Russ and Boyd. It worked great whenever you had Darlene killing Dell. It was even good whenever Helen first showed up. It really felt like you were in a natural maze. Even when you thought you were getting close to the exit, you only found out you were deeper in the maze with no idea where it is that you're actually going. But really, once we started getting more involved with Navarro and Helen and the casino and the FBI, it really started to feel like while we started off with an organic level of conflict, it started to feel much more artificial in a lot of things that they had to go through. It was just kind of like, okay, so we're just going to kind of go through a problem, and then Wendy's going to do that thing where she like gets all snarky and is like, you don't realize, but you've actually lost. You don't realize we're your only hope. It did such a good job at the beginning of just being constant, non-stop stress, really, in all of these problems. And they were very good at being able to talk themselves out of it, but it just started to get bogged down in like, okay, so there's just more and more problems. Like the cartel really hasn't killed them yet. Like, or that it just got to be unbelievable to the point that these people are actually able to talk them out of these situations. It was like, so the formula is just every time they do something, it just becomes more and more stressful. Like people just show up and they're kind of like, well, we know exactly what you're doing. We're figuring out everything, blah, blah, blah. It never feels like anything is brought to a reasonable conclusion. It's like, end the storyline that we're on, and then we'll naturally get onto a new storyline, and then eventually we'll bring the whole show to a close. The thing that I was getting very worried about the more we got into Navarro, and I think the biggest problem with this last season, it shows that the screenwriters didn't know what to actually do with these characters beyond piling more and more conflict on top of them. For example, what is the one most advertised thing about this last season? It's that car crash. That was what the first trailer was. It opens the entire season with it. And you know what that ends up resulting in? In the last episode, they have a car crash. Everyone is fine. Now look, every time you watch any show, even when the worst thing is panned, you're going to find fans that come out and say, well, you don't understand, because there's real meaning behind the thing that everyone's criticizing, and the meaning is this. I understand that there's meaning behind the car crash. I understand that there's a lot of meaning in all of this stuff that goes on. I'm saying that the way that they decide to resolve everything, while I'm sure you could write me a sentence as to what it actually means, does not feel like there's a lot of substance behind it. I don't know anything interesting about these characters. It feels like plot points filling in spaces of meaning. It doesn't actually feel like anything is really going on of substance. It just feels like we're trying to move the plot along. And hey, if you enjoy the plot, just tell yourself that it means something. The more time that this last season went on, it really started to feel like, shoot, I don't think they're actually going to be able to bring anything to a close. I don't think they've ever done that. They're just going to continue on with the what happens next? What happens next? We're not resolving anything. We're just going to keep throwing you curveballs, and the curveballs are like the meaning in the plot. But I think the part that it becomes a big problem is with Ruth. Ruth really is the most important character in Ozark. She is the one that has to actively go through the most meaningful change. The birds are very interesting, but they're kind of degenerating throughout the entire show. Ruth is the one that comes from a very messed up family. She has to work to pull herself out of that curse and make something of herself. And she does a very good job of that. You see her start to get a sense of honor, and she sticks to that moral throughout the rest of the show, and the performance is absolutely incredible. Ruth really is the backbone of the show. And the way that she died, being killed off by a character that has come in just in these last few episodes, and in a way that is not, because, you know, shows like The Sopranos do that. You get a new character that we haven't seen much of, but they're so strong. They have to be so strong in order to really push up against the characters that are the backbone of the series. And this character, she just does not do that. Navarro's sister does not do that. She doesn't have that sense of threat. It doesn't feel like what Ruth has built throughout this whole show is worthy of being knocked down by this character that we know nothing about. It's just not worth it. It felt so lazy to have Ruth go out that way, and it felt like disrespecting what was really the heart of Ozark. And then you look at the main characters, which are Marty and Wendy. The whole show is really about this family selling their soul to the devil. And this is the moment where it's going to have to be solidified that that is actually what happened. Now, there's a part with the cop that comes up at the very end, but it really does not feel at all like they actually contend with the death of Ruth. Sure, they have a scene on the boat, and they're like, yeah, we're going to get over this and everything, but it's so blasé. Like, there have been so many, like, think about what happened with Ben, which I think Ben is probably the strongest storyline that the show pulled off, and that's also the most disappointing, because they actually showed we can bring a conclusion to something other than Wendy drinking like 2 gallons of vodka in the parking lot and then still being okay. That aside, that actually did a good job with that character, and it did a good job showing the family really having to struggle through it, and the family still being corrupted by that. But with the death of Ruth, which really should be the most painful for the show, it just feels like nothing. It feels like they didn't have to contend with it. It feels like they just kind of glossed over it, and by glossing over it, it's like, okay, well, I'm supposed to feel like these people sold their soul to the devil. They're not dealing in a negative or positive way about Ruth going away. They're just kind of, it's not even like, it's like they forget about it. It's like, oh, well, we'll deal with that. We dealt with it in the last 10 minutes. They had a conversation and everything. It's like, there was no meaning. There was no real power in the way that they dealt with it. And then at the last moment, look, I'm just going to say the cop being there, first of all, is so dumb. The PI being there is so dumb. This guy just figured out that he's dealing with a family that is ruthless enough to kill a family member, and he decides that he's going to keep the evidence with him and just kind of tell them, hey, you're over now. I've got your evidence that you killed a family member. I'm just going to sit around and tell you about it. It's like, the guy didn't strategically, just on the level of, the show loves to throw plot points at you. It's all about just, oh, isn't that a tricky bit of the plot? Why is this guy hanging around? That is so stupid on his face. But okay, if we want to accept that part, which I think ruins it on its own, but you're saying Jonah then shows that the whole family is now turned bad because the one that was the most distrusting has now gone over to their side. I've got to say, that also feel like does not make sense. Jonah and Charlotte were turning on the family this entire season, and you're telling me because they have a conversation with their mom in the psychiatric ward, and then they go through that crash, that was what got them on their parents' side. That was it? Like, that's, I'm sorry, that's, I get it, what the show is saying is happening. I don't buy it at all. You actually need more time. You need to show the characters going through something else that actually changes them. There's nothing to look back on and be like, oh, I see the change that's happening. It's like, okay, they got in a car crash and they're all fine. What? Really? Is that what changed his mind to be with his family forever? Also, an important point to remember, if we're actually going to say Charlotte and Jonah have decided that they're going to go over to the dark side, be like one exactly like their parents, then that means that they also have to be able to contend with the death of Ruth. If you're going to tell me that at the end of it cutting to black, they then tell him, oh, guys, by the way, Ruth is dead. And they're like, what? We need to see how they're going to react to that information. If the kids accepted Ruth as just being collateral damage, then at that point they have gone over to the dark side. People are saying this ending shows that they've gone over to the dark side. It's like, I don't think that it does. You didn't show them having to deal with Ruth's death in any way. You kind of copped out of that one. You just didn't want to deal with it. You didn't deal with it. So you're laying it all on the line for this PI that's holding the information on them right under their noses, which is stupid to begin with. I think Ozark is good at throwing problems at the birds, but they're not good at resolving them in a way that feels like they have actually thought about how to bring a story to a close with these characters. It just feels like they're actively trying to just push through new missions, and instead of resolving missions, they just throw another one at them. And you know what? That can be entertaining. Netflix has done a good job with making that fun, but they haven't been able to bring it to a close. They didn't bring it to a close. It felt lazy. It felt lazy for the birds. It felt lazy for Ruth. So I just don't think it was good. I don't think it was a good ending. And the last season in particular was not great. Navarro also, like in terms of villain, we have all seen mafia shows. We hear mafia stories. I just don't believe that he wouldn't have killed these guys like days, months before. I just don't buy it. So give me your thoughts on Ozark. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and also subscribe to 5 Minute Critic for future updates on reviews and movie news.